My manipulative sister tried to seduce my fiancé to ruin my wedding, caught on camera and disowned by our parents. My older sister Dove, she's 29 now, has always been a real piece of work, and I mean that in the worst way. She's got this evil, self-obsessed streak that's made my life hell for as long as I can remember. Right before my wedding, she went and tried to seduce my fiancé, Atlas, just to bust us up. Lucky for me, she got caught on camera pulling that stunt, and my folks finally had enough. They kicked her out of their lives for good. Dove's always hated me being around, like I don't deserve the good things I've got going. She's divorced now, crashing at mom and dad's place because she ain't got a job. Back in the day, she ditched college to chase after some rich guy she was dating. That blew up in her face when he saw who she really was and dumped her. Growing up with her was rough, let me tell you. She was the golden child, pretty, sharp as a tack, and full of herself. Mom and dad couldn't stop singing her praises, always taking her side, while I was left feeling like I couldn't do nothing right. Folks would go on and on about how good she looked, and I was just the plain one in the background. That stung bad, and she knew it. She'd rub it in my face, telling me nobody cared about me, just to mess with my head. Those little jabs she threw at me as a kid stuck deep, leaving me unsure of myself all the time. Mom and dad never backed me up, never paid much mind to how I felt, because Dove was their star who always lived up to what they wanted. So, I started keeping my distance from them when I was young, through my teenage years too. Dove had her buddies over at the house all the time when our parents were out working. Those friends of hers would trash my room, and one time they even wrecked a school project I'd been pouring my heart into. I nearly flunked because of it. I wanted to tell Mom what happened, but Dove cornered me, threatening to show all my classmates some awful pictures of me if I snitched. I was 14, scared out of my mind, so I kept my mouth shut. She never owned up to anything she did wrong, and complaining to my parents was pointless, they didn't listen anyway. She pulled so many rotten tricks that I ended up hating her with everything I had. Mom would never stick up for me, but Dad, every once in a while, would call Dove out on her nonsense. One time, after I told Dad something she'd done, she grabbed my phone and sent some weird pictures of me to my friends, girls I hung out with, just to get back at me. Then there was the time she accidentally dumped coffee all over my prom dress, crying like she didn't mean it, playing the victim. After that, I quit talking to Dad about her. I couldn't figure out why she despised me so much. It hit me later on that Dove's a narcissist. It wasn't about me at all, just her messed up way of seeing the world. She was trouble in every relationship she had, cheating on every guy she went out with. I hate saying it, but she was after their money too, a real gold digger. Her ex-husband's still a buddy of mine, and he'll tell you the same. She was downright nasty as a teenager, and growing up didn't change a thing. If anything, she got worse. I blame Mom and Dad for that. They never put their foot down with her, never made her face the music. Things started looking up for me after high school, though. I busted my tail to get into the college I'd always dreamed of, and after a couple tough years getting started, I landed a job I'd been chasing forever. That's where I met Atlas, the guy who'd end up being the love of my life. We hit it off at a work conference. He's smart, good-hearted, and easy on the eyes. We clicked right away, and it wasn't long before we were dating. We took trips together, vacations, little outings, hikes, and all that time on the road made us tight. Atlas is real close with his brothers and folks, so he brought me to meet them pretty quick, just a few months in. Me? I dragged my feet introducing him to my family. Dove was the big reason why. I had this gut feeling she'd try to ruin it all. She'd always gotten the best of everything growing up, and now that my life was going smoother than hers, I knew she'd hate it, especially me having a solid guy like Atlas. But I couldn't put it off forever. After a year and a half together, Atlas started wondering why I hadn't brought him around my folks yet. So, I told Dad about him. He was glad I'd found a decent man and asked us to come over for dinner. I was excited to show Atlas off, but man, was I nervous too. Dove's got a knack for wrecking my life any chance she gets. I gave Atlas the full rundown on her, even though he already knew a bit about how my family works. He took it in stride, said he'd deal with whatever came up. A few days after I talked to Dad, Dove called me out of nowhere. She'd never bothered ringing me up before. She started asking about Atlas when we were coming home, what he was like. I figured Mom must have spilled the beans that I was serious with this guy. Suddenly, she's acting all friendly, but I saw through it. I knew why she was sniffing around. It got me thinking hard, should I really risk letting her meet Atlas? Her intentions ain't good, I can feel it. Maybe I ought to switch things up, have Mom and Dad come to my place instead to meet him. So, after folks started giving me some solid advice about how to handle this mess with Dove, a few of them wanted to know more about her deal. Let me lay it out for you. My sister was a real brain in school growing up, always aced her classes. But the second she hit college, it was like her smarts took a back seat. She got all wrapped up in how she looked, obsessed with her figure and fixing herself up pretty. That's when she crossed paths with this guy named Jeremy. He had deep pockets, loaded with cash, and she fell hard for him. She chucked her studies out the window to be with him, figuring he'd be her meal ticket. Meanwhile, I was grinding away, getting ready for my college entrance exams in my last year of high school. Dove kept running her mouth, telling me I'd never make it into the school I wanted. She was dead wrong, I got in. For once, Mom and Dad noticed me. They were proud, threw me a little party with family and close friends to celebrate me making something of myself. Dove couldn't stand it, though, me getting the spotlight instead of her ate her up inside. She decided to steal the show at my party. Right in the middle of it, she blurted out that she and Jeremy were getting engaged. You should have seen his face, he looked like he'd been hit by a truck, totally clueless about her plan. But it worked for her, everyone shifted gears, buzzing about Jeremy and how rich he was supposed to be. She pulled it off, made my big day about her instead. After that, she'd always shove these fancy gifts he got her in my face, jewelry, clothes, whatever, and say I'd never snag a guy with money because I wasn't good looking enough. It got under my skin, but I fired back one time, told her I didn't need to chase cash like she did, I could take care of myself. She didn't like that. To me, she was just selfish, the kind of person who'd step on anybody to get what she wanted. About a week later, her and Jeremy made it official with an engagement. I was already off at college by then and didn't bother showing up for it. I didn't talk to her at all while I was away at school. Going home for breaks was actually nice because she'd moved in with Jeremy. She'd be off jetting around to fancy places with him, beaches, resorts, you name it, while I was home kicking back. They dated for a year, then tied the knot in this big, over-the-top wedding. Jeremy footed most of the bill, but Dad chipped in some too, just to be polite, since Dove didn't bring a dime to the table. That marriage didn't last long, though, 3 years, and they were done. Turns out, Jeremy wanted kids, and Dove didn't. He never pushed her, he told me later, but it burned him up that she hid how she felt and dodged talking about it for years. On top of that, she was out partying all the time, drinking too much, flirting with other guys at bars. Jeremy said she only married him for his money, there wasn't no real love there. I couldn't believe it took him that long to see it, but he had proof, videos of her out with random dudes, letting them get handsy while she just laughed it off. Good riddance, I say, he's better off without her. Mom and Dad took Dove's side when it all fell apart, pinning the blame on Jeremy, saying he pressured her about the kid thing. They wouldn't hear a word against her. After the divorce, she had nowhere to go, so she moved back in with them. She'd quit college for Jeremy, so she had no degree, no job, nothing to show for herself after 5 years. She played it like the split broke her heart, moping around for sympathy, but it was an act. Give her a month, and she was back to her old ways, hitting clubs, hooking up with whoever. Her whole life turned into a cycle of going out, dating guys, then dumping them. I'd see her posting about it online, those social media stories told me everything I needed to know about what she was really up to. Me, I kept pushing forward. 2 years into my career, I landed this killer job I'd been dreaming about, with a paycheck to match. Mom and Dad were over the moon when I told them. I swung by home to celebrate with them, and Dad couldn't stop bragging on me. It felt good, you know? We were sitting down to eat when Dove rolled in, half-drunk from wherever she'd been. Dad didn't hold back, he lit into her, saying she should have stuck with school like I did instead of chasing after Jeremy and screwing up her life. He pointed out how I was making good money while she was still mooching off them. Mom tried to hush him up, telling him not to talk like that. Dove flipped out, stormed off, and slammed her door so hard the walls shook. That's when it clicked for Dad. He saw how spoiled she'd gotten. He told Mom she needed to get Dove's head straight, make her take charge of her life instead of living off them like a leech. I reckon Dove overheard him, because later that night, she barged into my room, all fired up. She told me I'd never measure up to her, no matter how much I was earning. Then she started picking at me, saying I had a gut, calling my face fat, just tearing into how I looked. Back when I was younger, that kind of talk would have crushed me, but now? I just laughed it off. I told her I didn't want to be anything like her and that she needed to sort herself out. Man, that set her off. She yelled at me to get out of the house, like she owned the place. I shot back that it was Mom and Dad's house, not hers, and she didn't run nothing. Next morning, I was packing up to head back when I found 2 of my dresses slashed to pieces, cut up with scissors, no doubt about it. I marched downstairs, showed Mom and Dad what she'd done. Dad was mad as hell, hollering for Dove to come explain herself, but Mom jumped in, making excuses, said Dove was upset and didn't know what she was doing. Dad told Mom to butt out. He laid into Dove, told her she better get her act together because he was done footing the bill for her nonsense. She didn't take it well, blamed me for everything, like always. From then on, she had it out for me worse than ever. I didn't let it get to me too much, but when she started sniffing around Atlas, that's when I knew I couldn't ignore her no more. So, things took a turn after that last visit home, and I've got some big news to share. I'm engaged. Atlas popped the question last month while we were on a trip together. He got down on one knee, pulled out a ring, and I couldn't stop grinning like a fool. I said yes, of course. But before I get too far ahead, let me back up and tell you what went down after I brought Atlas to meet my folks. Dove didn't waste no time trying to sink her claws into him. After we left Mom and Dad's place, she started texting him, asking how he's doing, acting all sweet. Now, Atlas loves cats, can't get enough of them, so Dove caught wind of that and started flooding his phone with cute cat videos. Thing is, she never gave a lick about cats before. Next thing I know, she's gone and got herself one, filming it and sending him clips like she's some big cat lover now. For the first couple weeks, Atlas would show me these messages, her trying to act all friendly and caring, asking about his job. It was pathetic, and we'd laugh about it. But then he stopped mentioning them, and I figured she'd given up, moved on to something else. We let it drop. Life was busy with work, and we had better stuff to focus on. One day, I'm flipping through my phone, checking social media, and I see Dove's popped up on Atlas's account. She's liking every post he's got, leaving little flirty comments all over the place, even digging back years into his old pictures and videos, stuff from 7, 10 years ago. It didn't sit right with me, gave me a bad vibe. So, on a hunch, I grabbed his phone one night and took a look. Sure enough, she was still texting him every so often, weird, clingy stuff, trying hard to get him to bite. Most of it was unread, sitting there ignored, which was good. Then I checked his call logs, missed calls from her, including one at 3 o'clock in the morning. That got my stomach churning. I couldn't let it slide, so I asked him straight up why he didn't tell me she was still at it. He got all jittery, said he was brushing her off and didn't want to drag her nonsense into our talks. I pushed him on the calls, and he took a breath, sat me down, and laid it out. He said one night Dove called him sounding real tore up, caught him off guard, made him think something bad had happened. She started going on about Jeremy, her ex, spinning some sob story about old hurts, saying she just needed someone to listen. Atlas told her to call Mom and Dad instead, said it wasn't right for her to ring him up that late. He even told her she ought to run it by me first if she's got something to say. That part stuck with me, him hiding it didn't feel good, and I told him so. Said it was starting to chip away at my trust. He swore up and down he'd never fall for her games, told me I didn't have a thing to worry about. I wasn't so sure. I've heard too many stories about guys getting sucked in by tricks like hers, even when they don't mean to. Didn't want to be the dummy who trusts blind and gets burned. So I laid down a rule: next time she calls, he's handing me the phone. I wanted to catch her in the act myself. Sure enough, one night she rang him up late, and he woke me up, passed me the phone. I answered, and she went dead quiet when she heard my voice, didn't expect that. Then she mumbled it was a mistake and hung up fast. Next day, I called her a bunch of times to set her straight, but she wouldn't pick up. I sent her a text from Atlas's phone, made it clear it was me, told her to quit calling or texting him at crazy hours unless it's some real emergency, and if it is, she's gotta go through me, not him. After that, she backed off, stopped messaging him altogether. I could finally breathe, thinking she was out of our hair for good. Then Atlas proposed, and I was over the moon. Sent a picture of the ring to Dad, he loved it, showed it to Mom and Dove, I'm sure. That's when she started up again, like clockwork. Texts to Atlas, dumb videos, the works. I was fed up. The minute he told me, I got on the phone and let her have it. Told her to knock it off and get herself a life already. She didn't say much, just let me vent years of pent-up anger, but I should have known she wasn't done. Soon as I hung up, Mom's on the line, mad as hell, chewing me out for hurting Dove. Said Dove told her I was accusing her of trying to steal my fiancé. Mom went off, saying I'd sent Dove into a panic, that I ought to show some heart for my sister who's been wrestling with depression since her rough divorce. I almost laughed. Dove wasn't depressed about that split, not even close. I cut the call short, then rang Dad up. Told him if they keep pretending Dove's some saint, I'm done, I'll cut them all out of my life. I'm through playing her fool. Man, I never figured Dove would sink as low as she did. She'd been making my life miserable forever, picking on me, tearing me down about how I look, poking fun every chance she got, but I didn't see this coming. Right before my wedding, she tried to get with Atlas, my fiancé, to bust up everything we'd built. It's one thing to deal with her usual garbage, but this? This was tough to stomach. We were putting the wedding together piece by piece, and I hadn't talked to Mom since that last blowout. Out of the blue, she called me up, said she was sorry for yelling before. Told me she'd panicked when Dove started freaking out, and it got the best of her. Then one of my cousins filled me in on what Dove was up to. She'd been crying to anybody who'd listen, saying I was pinning her as the bad guy, claiming she was after Atlas. She was telling folks I didn't deserve what I had, my job, my man, none of it. In her head, she's the stunner, so everything good ought to land in her lap, not mine. I ran that by Mom, and she didn't have much to say, just went quiet. Finally, she told me to let it go, focus on the wedding, and look ahead to a happy life. So, I did. Things went smooth for a bit. Dove stayed out of sight, didn't stir up trouble, and I thought maybe she'd backed off. Then the wedding day rolled around. We're at the venue, hustling to get ready for the big moment, when Atlas's best buddy calls me. Says I need to get to Atlas's room quick, bring Mom and Dad too. I joked that Atlas isn't supposed to see me yet, bad luck and all, but he cut me off, said it's serious, we've got to sort it out before the ceremony. My heart started pounding, and I hauled Mom and Dad over there fast. When we walked in, Atlas was sprawled out on the bed, shirt off, fading in and out, could barely keep his eyes open. His groomsmen laid out what happened, and it was ugly. Dove had shown up while Atlas was getting dressed, handed him a drink. He didn't want it, but she kept pushing till he took a sip. Right away, he knew something was off. Drink was spiked. He stumbled to the bathroom, called his friend, told him everything, and asked him to hurry over. By the time his buddy got there, Atlas was half out of it, slumped outside the bathroom. Good thing his friend had a keycard. He slipped in quiet, flipped on his phone camera, and caught the whole mess. Dove was on top of Atlas, peeling off her clothes, grinding on him while he's yelling at her to get off. She didn't know she was being recorded. When she spotted his friend, she tried to play it cool, acting like they were just fooling around, wrapped herself up, and bolted. Smirked at the guy on her way out, told him to keep his mouth shut about it. We got there, and Atlas was still a wreck. The drink hit him hard, left him dizzy and sick just from a little taste. It was sitting there on the table, some weird stuff settled at the bottom. Mom and Dad were mortified, couldn't believe she'd pulled something this rotten. Mom dialed Dove, told her to get to the room right then. She strolled in, lipstick smeared all over her face, and started spinning a tale. Said we might be mad, but it was mutual, claimed Atlas was into her, had been chasing her since they met, and talked her into a quick fling before the wedding. Mom wasn't having it, smacked her across the face, told her we saw through her lies and had it all on video. Dove's jaw dropped when she heard that. Mom and Dad hauled her out of there, told her to get lost before she made things worse. They had security block her from coming back in. She wanted the whole place to think she'd hooked up with Atlas, so I'd call everything off. That was her plan. Dad got a doctor in to check Atlas, and sure enough, the drink was laced with something nasty that scrambled his head. Atlas's family was ready to track her down and tear into her. Mom and Dad had to talk them down, saying sorry over and over to cool things off. We had to push the wedding back till Atlas could shake it off. He was puking his guts out for hours. Word spread fast among the guests, and they had plenty to whisper about for days. Once he was steady, Dad walked me down the aisle, and I was glad to see Atlas standing there as my husband. Still, I couldn't shake the stress of what went down. During his vows, Atlas threw in an extra promise, said he'd guard what we have against anybody who wants to tear us apart. After the honeymoon, Mom and Dad came by our place, apologized to Atlas for all the chaos Dove caused. Dad swore she's gone from our lives for good, kicked her out of the house, told her she's on her own now. I can't get that day out of my head, though. We were this close to losing everything. If his buddy hadn't caught it on camera, I might have doubted Atlas myself, and that's a hard thought to wrestle with.